Hey everyone, I'm Bob Morley. I played Bellamy Blake on the show The 100. I'm here today with my friend and the amazing Lynette Noni. Hey Lynette.
Hello, hello.
How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you, Bob?
I'm excellent. I'm excellent. But we're here today to talk about your ninth book and the book launch of The Prison Healer.
Yay!
Yeah. So, I mean, I was wondering if you wanted to give your elevator pitch of it, but don't give away too much because I'm only about a third in. But yeah.
All right. A spoiler-free elevator pitch. So I would say The Prison Healer is about a 17-year-old girl who has been locked in a death prison for 10 years. And when she's finally given the chance to earn her freedom, the cost could be her very life. So kind of throw in like some royals and some rebels and a plague. Sorry, everyone. And some elemental magical trials and a very charming love interest. And you have kind of a very vague recipe for what this story is about.
Mm-hmm. I like it. I like what I've read so far, and I'm really excited for it. I guess this is one of the fan questions, and it's like slots right into this. But what inspired you to write The Prison Healer?
It was a couple of things, actually. So at the beginning of 2019, I was traveling and I met this young woman who told me, I only met her briefly, I don't even remember her name, but she told me about how she'd grown up in like this war-torn, impoverished country. And when she was a teenager, her father was seen shaking hands with someone from an opposing religious faction, and her entire family was sent to prison. And so he was sent to like this horrible torture prison. She and the rest of her family was sent to like a political kind of prison. I think a couple of her brothers like got away and fled the country. But anyway, they thought they'd get out within a couple of days. Like he hadn't done anything. And she ended up being in there for 5 years. So her story just really, the injustice of her story really resonated with me. And also her incredible agency. Like she taught herself English. She got a university degree while she was in there. She really worked really hard. She buddied up to the guards and she made them her friends so that they could get her, special treatment. And just all of this kind of, it stayed with me, and I never intended on using it for a book. But then 6 months later, I was traveling and I went to Fremantle Prison in Western Australia as a tour thing. And it just, this setting kind of just really reminded me of her story and reawakened this idea and that feeling that evoked within me from what I'd heard in her story. And on the flight back from there, I started writing and The Prison Healer came about.
Yeah, wow. That's amazing. So how old was this girl when she went into prison?
I think she was, oh gosh, I cannot remember because when I left her, I was like, that's a horrible story. I'm really privileged where I've grown up and I'm so thankful. And I just hate that this is happening in the world. But I kind of moved on with my life. And even though it had stayed with me, so I don't remember the details. I do know she was a teenager. I want to say she was probably about 16 when she first went in.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It's really quite an amazing story. Also, you like to just go and check out prisons? Is that
okay, no. So I was over in Perth and I was doing a literary festival for schools, and I had one day off and everyone told me, you have to go and check out this prison. And I just looked at everyone, I was like, do I look like the kind of person that goes and hangs out around?
So this is the big selling point over in Perth, is it?
Apparently it is. And it was just, I was like, all right, I don't know if I'm bowing to peer pressure or if I'm just really curious here. And so I went, and Fremantle Prison, it's heritage listed, so there's no actual prisoners there anymore. But they have this incredible, I had no idea, but the prisoners there, they used to tunnel beneath the prison as part of their labor to create water as a water source for the prison. And so now you're filling in the gaps.
I see.
And so I went down these terrifying ladders deep into like the bowels of the earth, and I walked through some of these tunnels and I hopped in like a paddle boat for like a little paddle boat. Who says that? Like a canoe. And I, some of the ones that were partially submerged, and it was terrifying, but it was amazing. And then I went back again later that night and I did this night tour. Actually, it was a ghost tour.
Yeah, I was going to ask, I was like, is there a ghost element to this?
There was a ghost element. It was actually really embarrassing because I was so like, wow, look at everything. There's the hangman's noose, there's the flogging post. This is so morbid and horrific. And because I was so busy looking around, I missed the actual ghosty scares. So at one point,
well, they had ones in place. They had
exactly. Well,
right.
at one point, everyone just started screaming, and I was looking over there, and then suddenly I looked over there, and like a body had fallen from like somewhere, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
Yep. I get it. Well, I mean, that kind of brings me to the world building aspect of it. Like, you know, what I've been reading so far, it's just so visceral, and I can actually picture myself in the prison. And I guess that's where I'm asking, like, how do you build out a world like that? How, like, what inspiration do you draw from, like Fremantle or your travels?
Well, I mean, it's a great question because everyone, I think, does world building differently. This is in books, but also in TV and film, you know, and so you've got to address where you're going to come at it from. And especially on the book front, sometimes you'll read a book and there is just so much heavy world building at the beginning that you get a bit lost and there's so many details. So I'm going to bring it back to basics and use a Shrek quote, which I kind of live by when it comes to world building. And that's ogres are like onions, we have layers. Or if you're with donkey, you know, your cake. But I kind of just try and walk it out through the eyes of my characters as we go forward. And so I try and make it as relatable as possible so that there's not too many, you know, it's not this like overwhelming info dump. But then I just try and remember also to use the five senses. You know, what you can see is obviously very important, but, you know, the kinds of the smells and the tastes in the air and the things you hear and the touch. And so, you know, whether that's using seasons, you just try and make it as real as possible. And you hope that, I guess in the case as you, that it kind of transports the reader into that place.
But when you have you have your protagonist going through and you have the sights and smells and the five senses, like when you get to the extremes, the parameters of your world, like how do you then create that, you know, like, because it's quite expansive and there's, you know, the map at the start of the book and you've got all these other places. How far do you go into developing that? Or do you, as the author, explore that as you go with your character?
A bit of both. I think I don't know if this is abnormal or not, but I feel like every book I write is a little bit different as to how I approach it. So with The Prison Healer, because, you know, that idea came to me so fully formed and I knew I wanted to add this magic. And so I had to sort of sit back and have a look at how that magic would be incorporated into the world building and how the world could, I guess, how they could kind of work parallel to each other and then also bring the characters into it. And so I had some time to stop and think about that beforehand and plan out how I would make that work. But other books, I've just kind of been like, let's just see what happens next. So
do you ever find, I'm kind of getting on a tangent here, but do you ever find that when you're writing, you'll create a character and then you just want to be drawn into that character's story and they want to take you on a tangent? You're like, I know I have to keep coming back to my story, but I like this little person here and I want to follow that.
It happens all the time. There is a character in The Prison Healer. It's a character who has like a 5-second scene, and that character was never meant to have a major role. But in the second book, which is also coming out later this year, this character ends up being a main character because I was just like, I need to know more about their story. And so I'm terrible when it comes to that because I like how you said, you know, you follow. You sort of follow them and then you realize, no, you've got to rein it back. I'm not very good at reining it back, Bob.
Right. That's so, like, it's just funny to hear you say, like, you know, like this character appears and you're like, oh, I want to know what you've had for breakfast. I want to know everything about you and I want to explore you, but it's all within your imagination, you know? It's kind of,
it's messed up.
It's just very abstract in that. But there is, when you do create a character, they take on a life of their own. And so you get to go with them on their journey.
Well, that must be a bit like you. I mean, there must be some kind of dual nature with, you know, Bob and Bellamy and you kind of, you know, focusing on that. And how do you, I mean, did you want to get to know Bellamy more as the actor of him?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. You know, obviously, like I have thoughts and feelings and, you know, what I think his intentions are. And sometimes they align with the writers, sometimes they don't. And so there's not that freedom like you would have to be like, oh, okay, well, let's just go and see where this guy takes me or whatnot. You know, like I would like to explore certain aspects of my character, but if the script isn't there and I can't do that, then it's like, okay, well, this is who he is. And you try to then build those layers into your performance, even though they won't necessarily be seen on screen. So it's a little bit different in that sense, but
that's so fascinating. I do not envy you that. I would be like, I need to follow this character, what they're telling me to do. And you'd be like, I can't.
There's definitely characters that have popped up in the show where I'm like, what is their backstory? And they don't ever come back. You know, there was this one character, I think his name was Riley, and there was this big kind of fanfare about him. He's like, he's back. And then he just disappeared. And it's like, oh, I would have liked to have learned a bit.
I think I remember that as a viewer. I was like, wait, go back. I want to know more.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a lot of other aspects. And I guess, you know, there's a lot of voices that come into writing a show, like a very collaborative process. So, you know, it's not as freeing, I guess, when you're in control of the world.
How funny. I think I have that to like a much smaller extent when I go through like the editing process, because my editors might be like, oh, well, what if you add this in, or what if you change this, or what if you tweak this dialogue to this? And I have to really evaluate whether that actually keeps the character in character. And sometimes it amplifies it and it's great. But sometimes I just sort of sit there staring at like their suggestion and go, what? No, where did that come from?
I was going to actually ask you about that, like about edit. Have you ever gotten editor's notes where you're like, well, clearly I didn't make my point, you know, so apparent that they're going off and they're thinking it might be this or X, Y, or Z. Have you ever had editor's notes where you've gone, okay, I'm not doing my job right because they've totally read the wrong thing into this?
I mean, I don't want to say all the time, but all the time. And that's the beautiful thing of having editors, is that they, you know, as a writer, I will write the draft, but then they come at it from every single angle and they point out things that I might not have realized, or, you know, in the case that I've written something in complete innocence and they're like, this could be taken a really bad way. Do you want to reword it? And I look at it from their eyes, I'm like, oh, yes, I want to reword it. Or it could be the opposite. And they're like I recently just had something and it was trying to say that someone was crying without actually saying that they were crying. And my editor was like, what's happening to this person's face? So I just had to be like, oh, okay, I'll just use the word.
You're like describing the distortion of their face.
How it crumples. And they're like, why is their face crumpling?
You just, they're crying.
Yeah.
What is that?
Read the words, people.
Yeah, I guess you can kind of get caught up in like this poetic portrayal of what it is that you're trying to do, and then sometimes it's, you know, the simplest description is the best. But
yeah, but then also sometimes the opposite, where they're like, you need to flesh this out. We don't actually know what's happening here, and then I go back and make something, you know, bigger or more cinematic or whatever. So it's really interesting. I often find that those kind of moments, those deep dive moments, happen in like the slow points of the story rather than the action scenes, because when I'm writing those, I'm so in the moment that it just kind of, I see it in my head and it plays out and it writes out. But it's the high stakes emotional drama and those quieter, softer moments that are so vulnerable but also so powerful that you just have to, from an editing and a writing perspective, just really make sure you get right.
Yeah. Now, like, do you are there certain aspects, like, you know, the very action and plot driven stuff, or the, you know, the very like introspective moments where you're like, oh, I've got to write that bit, or like, there are any bits that you labor over that you just wish you could get to this point? You know, like you have your markings along the way and you're like, I can't wait till I get to write this section of the book, but right now I'm wading through this other stuff to get me there. I
don't think I have this sort of motto that's, you know, if I'm bored writing it, people will be bored reading it. So I try to make sure that, you know, you can't have a book that is just action the whole time, because it's exhausting for a reader, but you also can't have it so that it's just sort of nothing happens the whole time. So I kind of try to balance out the action scenes with the drama or the emotion or the vulnerabilities, and just kind of, and because of that, you know, if I've hit an action scene, I'm ready to have okay, let's bring this back and let's calm this down and have an introspective. How do I feel? How does the character feel, and what's going on? And so I think there's just so much power in those moments that I really cherish them. And I think when I'm writing a first draft, I don't notice. But if I find that when I'm going back and revising, and it started to get a bit slow, or or something is just sort of dragging a bit, that's when you edit and make those parts shorter and quicker. So it's a balancing act.
Yeah. Well, when you are writing it, do you write chronologically? Do you go, okay, or do you do it in sections and then stitch it together?
Yeah, it's a great question. I have lots of people, like lots of author friends who, similar to your previous question, the scenes that they're so excited to write, they'll jump forward and they'll write those scenes and then stitch them back in. But I really like to write like from beginning to end chronologically, because I feel like for me personally, if I'm writing, if I'm trying to stitch a scene back in, even if hopefully a reader won't notice it, I will always notice that there is a seam there. And I tried to make previous information flow into this point by doing this. And so there's a couple of, so one example that comes to mind is in the second book in this series, The Gilded Cage. During the editing process, I went back and I added 3 new chapters to the middle of the book. And thankfully it flowed really well, excuse me, just purely because they were beginning of chapter to end of chapter and it worked in. But, but if you're just adding like a paragraph here or there, you just have to be so careful to make sure it still flows with everything. So I just like writing beginning to end.
I should get into some of these fan questions, because you and I could rabbit on for ages. So here's one. Do you think the 100 characters would survive in a carnet, and vice versa?
Oh man, I feel like the 100 characters would survive anywhere, wouldn't they? They probably, actually, that's not true. They probably wouldn't survive in like a perfect utopia. There wouldn't be enough death.
Yeah, exactly. Like they say they want peace, but they seem to do the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, they'd absolutely survive they'd thrive in the prison healer world. They would just take out the entire prison. But yeah, in my Akane series, I think they'd probably be a little bit bored until all the battle stuff started, and then they'd be like right in their element.
Yeah, that's so true of those characters. But that actually reminds me. Okay, so Kiva, I said her name, right? Kiva?
Yeah, Kiva.
Yeah. So you've described Kiva to me. I have an idea of who she is in my head. When you're writing her, is there like a person, like an actor or an image or a person that you take with you, or like that you have in your mind of what she sounds like and what she looks like? Or is that just all coming from you?
I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. I sort of think of it, I don't see her in a visual sense. I guess you could say I feel her essence, if that's a weird thing to say. Like, she's such a fully formed character to me, so that I have to know her as if she's a real person, so that if someone or something was to happen to her, she would react in a way that is completely natural to how she's been built and created. So I would say it's like I know her on a personal level, even though I know she's a figment of my imagination. But it's a weird compartmentalizing kind of thing. It's like, here's my character boxes in my head, and then here's me as a real human. And so I kind of jump into that box, and so I know like physically I've given her like dark hair and emerald eyes and whatever else. I know that she is real.
Yeah, but that's kind of superfluous to her essence of what you want.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be curious, I know you're asking me questions, but you as Bellamy, similar thing, like you were given this character and then you had to bring him to life based on I guess the details that you were given, but also what you felt.
Yeah. I mean, so in the books, I read the first book, and then obviously the book and the show went two different ways. But even just early on, so Octavia was only, I think she was quite young. Like I think she was only like 12 or 13 in the book. So there was his protectiveness was kind of a bit more understandable because she was just a child. But that's definitely something that I took on. But there's aspects of my own life that I've put into Bellamy. Like my brother and my sisters raised me, so he's more molded on the people that I know in my life, and not so much from the book that I read. But yeah, Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense. Oh, well, I should ask these questions, but I was like going to go into the fantasy league of casting, and I know that that's probably been asked of you a lot. So I'll leave that one and ask you another question here. How is your experience as a female author reflected in your approach to this book?
Ooh, that's a good one. Um, I always find it really important to write what's called a strong female character, and that term has positive and negative connotations. So I like to sort of explore it from every way. I don't necessarily mean strong as in Octavia in the sense that she could kill someone with a toothpick. I mean, sense, and some of my characters are warriors in other books, but in The Prison Healer, particularly, Kiva, the main character, she's a healer, and one of her strongest gifts is that of compassion and her humanity. And so, she's lived in this horrible death prison for 10 years, and she's still managed to maintain this sense that people matter and survival matters, and we are all here to look after each other. And she has trust issues to like the worst trust issues ever, but she'll still help everyone. And I think I think it's just really important as a female author to try and bring across those messages that strength comes in different ways, and sometimes it's with a dagger or a sword, and sometimes it's just with a quiet word and a calming touch.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an amazing approach to it. There's this kind of outdated ideas of like strong that are kind of based around masculinity, but I love the idea of compassion being one of the strongest assets you can have as a human being, and that's a universal truth, I think.
Yeah, it's a tough one, especially in, this world, this real world we live in it's so dark, and it's getting darker and darker. And so, those moments, those people who can kind of, I guess, bring that light, and also the characters that you can find in books that kind of help show you the way, I think they're really important, especially because, I write for a young adult audience, which is predominantly teenagers. And these people need that reminder that, yes, okay, there's some horrible stuff out there, but there is also some really beautiful stuff. And I've just got to be willing to look for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes me wonder, like I was pondering this before this interview, like, because I haven't read much YA fiction. How do you place yourself in the mindset of your audience? Like if this is for teenagers, like for me as a teenager, all I cared about was like playing football and eating food, and just very like, I didn't, so how is it that, you're probably a much more complex teenager than I was.
I don't think I was.
But how do you then place yourself into, because like I'm really enjoying the read, but how do you then place yourself into that world in which you try to appeal to a young audience, or is it just so happens that this is the category it falls into?
I mean, it's really interesting because, The Prison Healer, it's so, especially given the content and hopefully, the way it's written, it really does cross demographics, and adults will really hopefully enjoy it. I mean, you're an adult and you're hopefully enjoying it. And, and so I think, I use the word young adult. I'm looking down at the book as if I know it's going to speak answers to me. It's more that, with this one, the age of the protagonist, she's 17, so she's a teenager. And so therefore, because of that, it kind of brings it into that YA space. But I have tried to come at it from a mature perspective that, but also because I don't know if you've ever read these books, and sometimes they are a lot of young adults, the books that I will read, and you just feel like your IQ is dropping as you read it. And so some of them are just a little bit too basic and a little bit too easy. And I'm sure I'm guilty of writing this in my other books as well. And so I wanted something that I want to appreciate my readers and respect that they are smart and they are capable and they are intelligent, and they will I guess acknowledge this through the book, and they will enjoy it all the more if I'm not babying them through it. So I mean, at the end of the day, a YA book is about like a coming of age story, and it's learning the world around you and how that kind of affects you. And so that's, in a nutshell of what happens in this, and the decisions you have to make and the transition period of life, I guess, as a teenager into an adult. So all of those things are elements that kind of make it young adult. And yeah, I love writing in that space because it's just, I don't know, I really just enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I think it's exciting. I think it taps into, for me anyway, that excitement of the possibilities and opportunities and whatnot. Like maybe it's time. Maybe it's like maybe when like, I should be reading more YA.
Maybe you should write one, Bob. Don't you have a creative writing degree?
I do. But yeah, I'm like, I'm sure you come across this all the time, or maybe not all the time. You've written 9 books, so you probably don't. But there's always that self-doubt in my head that's like, nah, this isn't good enough, or like you're never going to finish it. So I'll start writing and then never really finish it. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in that way.
I have that with every book. That doesn't matter how many you've written or not. I sit down.
Then I'm just making excuses.
You are just making excuses. I feel like I need to hold you accountable to this.
Oh, I've been doing some writing and stuff like that, and maybe one day I'll be brave enough to put it out there. There are some other questions, and what has been the most exciting process about releasing this book?
Oh, this book has been terrifying, but in a great way. I think, so, you mentioned that I have released 9 books, but this is kind of my global splash. And so the moment we went out on submissions, it just went to auction all around the world in so many different territories, which is something I've never experienced before.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, so it's crazy, and I just kept getting all these emails and phone calls with all this news, and I'm like, are you sure that's for me? And so yeah, I'm really excited. I'm really looking forward to seeing, I guess, the world take on this book of The Prison Healer and see where it goes. And part of me is rocking in the corner, but I'm also I'm so, I guess, I don't know, honored and humbled and amazed that so many people are supporting it. And yeah.
Is there like a little part of you that's like, I wish there wasn't a pandemic so you could be going out and seeing, like doing the tours and whatnot? It must be weird doing a book launch. You've done 9 of them, but doing a book launch now, from your living room must be somewhat.
Yeah. There's pros and cons. The biggest con is that I love my readers, and they're just the most beautiful people. So not being able to interact with people and see people face to face and sign books and answer questions, that's really sad. But the good thing about the virtual space is it opens up the world. So people watching this will be watching it from everywhere and anywhere, rather than if we were in person, it would just be whoever's in the room with us. So, that said, I'm really looking forward to COVID being over so we can all get out there and do stuff in real life again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that we're running out of time, but I just wanted to ask you, do you ever do readings? Do you ever sit down and do readings?
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, what is that like? And it sounds like you don't really enjoy them that much.
I hate reading from my own books. And I do think, I get asked to do it and I do have to do it, but I feel like you would be fantastic at this because you probably know how to do the voices, but as an actor, you could figure it out. Whereas, I don't know, maybe it's because I haven't had kids, so I don't know how to read like a bedtime story and throw my voice here and do this and do dialogue or whatever. But I feel like when I'm reading from my own books that it's just like word vomit and terrible. So I do it, but I really don't like doing it. I know we don't have any time, but do you remember the first ever thing that you acted? And I don't know what that is, but whatever your first thing that was going to air, how did you feel knowing that was your baby or your work was about to be okay, I know it's a bit different, but look,
I've never gotten comfortable with it. I really struggle to watch my own stuff, and so it's just, yeah. I guess I think we're kind of the same. Like you reading your stuff out loud or me watching my stuff, it's like, no. I'm happy in my world when I'm doing it, but I don't particularly love seeing it out there. But we do have to wrap this up. It's been so great to see you. Is there anything else you want to say about it? When is it coming out again?
April 13th. So today.
So today. It's coming out today. So, I can't wait to finish it. I'm looking forward to The Gilded Cage as well, coming out in
October. Yes.
So it's a big year. There's a lot going on. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add to this, Lynette?
I'd like to add that I have like a million questions that I was going to ask you and I didn't get a chance to. So I'm sorry about that. I feel like we need to do another one of these, but the reverse way. And I can then ask all my questions.
Yeah.
But no, I really, you've been great. You're fantastic. You are a natural at this. So if you weren't already in your own amazing career path, I'd be like, you should do this all the time.
Oh, no, well, you're very easy to talk to. And I've really, really enjoyed it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where this goes for you. It's like an amazing accomplishment. And yeah, just wishing you all the best for it. Like, because I think it would be an incredible TV series or a film, and you've done such an awesome job creating that world. Yeah, it's congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I'm really excited, I guess, to see where it goes and what happens.
Yeah. I think it's going to be great.
Thank you so much for this. It was really fun.